Hello, thank you for joining this Zoom call. I'm Izzy Uzarali, the Co-op Parties Events Coordinator, and in this 5th week of the UK lockdown, I'm pleased to welcome you to our 4th Cooperation Live Zoom call. I do hope you're finding them useful and relevant. Today's call is to discuss the party's Love It, List It campaign, which highlights the need for our communities to protect the places that we love by listing them as assets on council registers and ensuring their legal protection for at least 5 years. Before I introduce our speakers, Alex and James, a couple of technical things in terms of running this meeting via Zoom. Firstly, you need to know that this call is being recorded, as many of our members cannot access it live, so we are making it available to view via the Co-op Party's YouTube channel. So if you're still in your pajamas or if you don't want your image to be seen, please remove yourself from the video and go to audio only. To make the content of the call clearer, only those speaking will be shown on the screen or have the sound enabled. Both speakers will be speaking to a presentation and we'll show you that on your screen or on your phone, so you'll see that happen later. Following the presentation, we'll hold a question and answer session. If you want to ask a question, click on the icon labelled Participants at the bottom centre of your PC or your phone screen. Then click the button labelled Raise Hand. That makes your digital hand enabled, and so we're now aware of your question. And when it's your turn to ask it, James will introduce you and we will unmute you. If you've dialed into the call using your phone rather than an app, you won't be able to ask a question, so could you email me the question direct, and that's at events@party.coop. So in today's call, you'll hear from Alex Sobel MP and James Butler, the Co-op Party's Campaigns Officer. Alex is the MP for Leeds North West and the newly appointed Shadow Tourism and Heritage Minister. Congratulations on your new role, Alex.
Thank you.
Leeds North West was one of the few good news stories for the Labour and Co-op Party in the 2019 general election, with Alex more than doubling his majority and increasing his share of the vote by nearly 5%. This was due to a great deal of hard work, impeccable local connections and a very effective and bespoke general election campaign. We probably couldn't have a better speaker on community assets with us today, as before entering Parliament, Alex ran the regional body of Social Enterprise Yorkshire and Humber. So over to you, Alex.
Thank you. It's great to see so many cooperators on the line, including a number of great Labour and cooperative councillors, including my former ward colleague, Sharon Hamilton. Hi, Sharon. I'll just switch over now to my slides, which I'm trying to find, and I'll take you through this. So you might think this is a funny time in the middle of the COVID crisis to be talking about assets of community value and community assets, but actually, what we find is that of times of crisis is when our local heritage, our local community assets are at risk, because the organisations that run them are obviously at a great deal of economic risk during the crisis, and they may, unfortunately, some of them will close. And what we wouldn't want to see is those community assets being turned into private profits, you know, flats or whatever being bulldozed for development. So actually, talking about community assets now and starting to work and do some community mapping and listing now is actually something that local co-op parties, local Labour and Co-op councils and cooperative councils and the community in general should be thinking about, because we don't want to lose those much loved community assets. And the sort of things that we're talking about are things like buildings, like community centres and libraries, but also parks and public gardens. And actually, the range of spaces is quite immense. And I'll just look, right, we're still on the welcome. That's good. So, so maybe we'll move on to the next slide. So James is doing the slides. Great. So what we're seeing is that the range of spaces we're losing every year is quite remarkable, but also that actually the types of community assets that are being listed are also very unusual. So I'll just talk a little bit about that first before I go on to why we're losing so many. So, I mean, you probably aren't aware that, for instance, Old Trafford and Ellen Road are listed as community assets because there are the community of football fans, and obviously our own communities are heavily invested in our football clubs. And what we wouldn't want to see is if those football clubs, and we, you know, for instance, this year we saw Bury Football Club go under, football clubs going under, that we'd lose the venues, and so the reopening of those clubs ever more difficult. So many sports grounds and football clubs right up to the largest stadium like Old Trafford are listed, but also things like music venues and nightclubs. So my favourite example of a community asset is Heaven Nightclub, which is a gay club near the Embankment. And you might think that's an unusual thing, a nightclub listed as an asset community value. But it was one of the first gay clubs in the UK, opened in 1979, and has had, well, you name it, they've had it there. And it now hosts GAY, which is the UK's biggest and longest running LGBT night. And so for the LGBT community, that is an absolutely iconic building and place. And these places do shut, being listed as an asset would give it some protection. So, you know, I'm a massive music fan. So some of the places we've lost in the last 20 years include places in London like the Astoria, which used to host GAY, like the Marquee. You know, everybody's heard of the Marquee. Like the Hacienda in Manchester. In Leeds, we lost the Duchess of York and the Cockpit. And in Wales, we lost TJ's in Newport, which is famous for being where Kurt Cobain proposed Courtney Love, if anybody is into the grunge scene of the 1990s. So it isn't just about our local, you know, sports club or local park. It is a much broader range than that. And actually, the most successful area of community asset listings is pubs. Every single pub in the town of Otley, my constituency, is listed as an asset of community value. And I think a lot of that is down to CAMRA and CAMRA taking advantage of listing assets of community value. Locality, which is an organisation I used to work with a huge amount before I was an MP and still work with now, but more then, has done a huge amount of work with the Co-op group, the Co-op Party and the movement on this, and the Plunkett Foundation in rural areas. And those are all good organisations to work with if you're thinking about listing an asset of community value. And they show that we're losing around 4,000 community spaces every year. During austerity, and due to no fault of their own, councils had to dispose of assets on their balance sheet. And you know, so we lost countless community assets through that. Although there are really good examples of asset transfer and the use of this legislation for councils, and Labour councils obviously led the way, but even some Tory councils did some asset transferring. There also is the issues of high streets, and actually my new role, Shadow Minister of Tourism and Heritage, the Heritage part, Heritage High Streets is a really important part of that, but we are seeing higher rents, loss of footfall due to online shopping, closing community assets on high streets and towns. And we are losing a lot of pubs because drinking culture is changing, and pubcos are turning pubs into flats and houses and care homes even, because of that. So we are seeing the loss of these spaces, and actually the loss of public outdoor space as well for development. So all of these things are hugely important. Now, because of the COVID crisis, lots of business, so things like hotels, pubs, private museums, art galleries, all sorts of places which could potentially be listed as a community value, are all struggling for business continuity. So it could really accelerate the closure of these community spaces. So it's another good time to be thinking about this. So moving on to the Love It, List It campaign, which is the Co-op Party's own campaign on this, and why we're doing this masterclass today. There is a web page on the Co-op Party website which gives some of the basic details, enough for you as well as this masterclass to get a feel for asset community value. But I would also really highly recommend the community value website that Locality run, which is the best source of information, and there's frequently asked questions on there as well. But also I'd say is talk to your local council. There will be an officer, usually in planning, who's in charge of assets and community assets, and they will have some local expertise, because I'm afraid to say there are some variations in how councils have interpreted the law on community assets and the guidance. And so what you might find in one place, something very similar, something in another place will get listed, and the other place it won't. And that isn't necessarily actually to do with political control. That is quite often to do with interpretation of officers. And so definitely, if it's not very clear cut, and we'll come on to that in a bit, talk to your local authority about that. And, you know, I think that actually, you know, I'm thinking about this in my own constituency, about places that could get listed that aren't listed currently, and actually thinking about the crisis, and thinking about some of the challenges we faced, and what if we have a crisis couldn't we live without. So like some of our food banks are run out of churches. Those churches aren't necessarily listed as community assets. Churches are effectively treated differently, but if there's a food bank run from them or from a community centre, that is a very good reason to list it as a community asset, because obviously you want the ongoing running of your food bank. Another thing is I think talked before about those sort of community space. So I've got a really world-renowned music venue, the Brunel Social Club. It isn't listed as asset community value, and I'm thinking now maybe we should get it listed. So these things bring to mind. So maybe doing that sort of work and thinking around those sort of things is important. I know James will come on to that in future. So next, so how did we how did this come about? Because obviously this is legislation's 9 years old now, so it came in through the Localism Act. I'm just checking that James has moved the slide up. So Localism Act, and I remember this really well because I worked at the time running both Social Enterprise Yorkshire and Humber and Co-operative Yorkshire and Humber. And I remember sitting while it was going through Parliament, going through second reading, actually texting the shadow cabinet member in charge of the cabinet office at the time about it, and trying to challenge the government on some of it, because afraid to say the legislation isn't as strong as we would have liked. Not so much on the listing side, but more on the moratorium and what can happen once it's listed. The listing side isn't too bad, but the Localism Act 2011 effectively brought into law both of those things, and effectively it said that if the use of a land or building was for the community recently, and it was its main use, then it could get listed under the Act. And I'll come on to this in a bit. I think James will cover this, but I'll come in on this on actually some of the. Sorry, I thought somebody was coming in then. So oh, I've been muted. All right, I was muted and unmuted. Something's happening on the. So hopefully everybody's still following this. Okay. Anyway, I probably need to hurry up anyway for this section. So I will move swiftly on. So basically, sometimes some issues are. I've been muted again. Now I'm unmuted. Okay. So sometimes there are issues around the length of time since it's been used as a community asset, which I think we'll come on to later. Right. So the last slide that I'm looking after is on how to list an asset of community value. So the first thing that you need to think about is when there is a planning application or change of use or sale of a community asset, is it going to be material in terms of that planning permission or change of use or sale? The second thing is that the main thing that an asset, the listing will give you, is that the community will have a right to bid on the asset, and there'll be a moratorium on the sale of the asset for 6 months. So so the community will have 6 months to raise the finance. This is really a lot of where the co-op side of it comes in, because a lot of these assets are bought under this right through a community share issue, through development of cooperative methods of finance. So, so the cooperative side of it is important, but there are other ways. So we recently actually used the asset community value on a pub in Otley on the Black Horse, and it was purchased during the moratorium period. The bid was accepted and it was actually by the Brudenell Social Club, because that they are effectively a working men's club. That's their legal form, is that they're a members club utilising that legislation. So they were accepted as the community organisation. There's a little bit of debate about whether they should or shouldn't, but in Otley, but that's how it was, and so it was purchased not commercially but through the community right to bid. However, so this is another example I'll give. So going back to the earlier example I gave you with the London Astoria, that would have been great if it had been listed as an asset community value to be saved, but it wouldn't have been, because the reason it was purchased and demolished was for Crossrail. If you go down, have a look, the place it's on is now part of the Tottenham Court Road Crossrail station, and that was through compulsory purchase. So it wouldn't have actually saved the Astoria at all, because compulsory purchase by a local authority or the government or another state authority is exempt. So if you're trying to save something that's going to be compulsory purchase by the state, say for HS2, for example, then unfortunately this won't really help you. So I think that is the end of my slides. Oh no, and I do number 7. I think I'm doing number 7, aren't I, as well? So I think I'm just doing one more and then I'm handing over to James. So what does an asset community value look like? Now this picture here is the former Headingley Community Centre, which I used to spend many hours in when I was a community worker here, God, nearly 20 years ago. And it ceased to be a community centre. They built a new community centre, which was actually a school. The community bought the local school after it shut and turned it a community centre. And but then they thought they might want to utilise the old community centre, the same organisation, the new community centre development trust, which is a locality member for community use. So they listed it in 2014. Unfortunately, they couldn't raise the money during the 6-month moratorium to purchase it. So although they did get listed and the moratorium did come into effect, it didn't actually in the end get purchased by a community organisation. So the lesson here is this isn't a panacea. This is just one piece of a much broader tool here. So James, handing over to you.
Thank you, Alex. That was wonderful. It's great to see you again as well. I suppose Alex covered what does an asset of community value look like, and it might be worth touching what isn't an asset of community value. And there are some exclusions in the legislation. Individuals own private houses cannot be ACVs. Likewise, Church of England property can't be assets of community value, although other denominations' buildings can be, which may go to something about the bishops being in the House of Lords, perhaps, and the amendments that they're able to lodge there. But this is an allotment in Derbyshire, in my patch, and you'd have thought that an allotment would be a fairly natural community value asset. You know, it's used by the public, it's a wider benefit, but this was rejected, and it's I'm not really one for reading out large chunks of the report, but it's quite illuminating, so forgive me if I just quote from the council's own pages. The critically important determining factor is that lettings have been entirely at the discretion of the owner. Even although the owner has allowed the land to be used for allotments, the fact that she, at her sole discretion, determines who may use the allotment plot and who may not, has on occasion declined to let plots without giving a reason, and has refused to have any dealings with the local allotment association. This effectively means that the use of allotments benefits those individuals who are successful in being granted a plot, not the local community. In essence, the owner has consistently exercised her right as a private landowner to decide who may or may not go on the land. No evidence has been seen which demonstrates that the land can be said to be open to the community. And I think that's goes to a couple of points. The first is, if this is an area that you want to explore as a branch or as an individual or as a council candidate or whatever, have a look at your local council's asset list first off, because that not only will save you an awful lot of time and avoid duplicating work, but it will also give you an idea of the attitude to which the council adopts. And as Alex says, it does vary quite considerably, and it's not always along party political lines. Some are just more open to doing this stuff than others. The other point is they all have forms which they prefer to use. Now, we will give you, as part of Love It Lift, kind of a standard form, but it's always better to use the bespoke council form. It's what the officers are used to and what they expect. I suppose the next question is, well, who can list an asset of community value? And as part, when we're designing the Love It Listed campaign, it was like, well, can political parties do this? Is this something that we could actually do? And here's the list from John from the legislation. And as you can see, pretty much everybody could, in theory, form into one of those groups at least. And probably the Co-op party could probably be the latter two if we were going to do it kind of centrally or locally. But what we really want to do is focus on the third bullet point, unconstituted community groups of at least 21 members. And that involves getting at least 21 signatures to support any applications. And when we're putting the campaign together, what we imagined as kind of our theory of change was that everyone would be out on the doorsteps, knocking on doors with clipboards, speaking to people. And you can imagine it being a really nice local campaign where you get to talk to people about why you want to protect a particular spot and why people should get behind that, and go into the cooperative difference as part of that. Clearly, that's probably not going to happen in the near future. And even when we come out of lockdown, I can imagine a lot of us will be reluctant to go knocking on doors. And even if we're not reluctant, a lot of people will be reluctant to opening doors. So certainly for the meantime, we're looking at digital, and we've got a kind of theory where you, as branches or as council candidates, will have a discussion or some contemplation about what really is of value to you and your community. You send us that list, we'll create an electronic petition form, give you a link, and that's something that you can campaign on locally through WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups, and your local Labour Party and Co-op Party kind of branch network by emails. It's worth touching on some devolution issues. I haven't got a list of where everyone's from in front of me, but if I just address Scotland and Wales, that'll probably cover any non-English members that we've got with us. In Scotland, we've got the Community Empowerment Act. In essence, it's quite a similar process to what we've got in England, but it starts with an assumption that there's a greater entry hurdle. And the assumption is that people don't just want to list a building, they want to take over running that building. And it asks for quite a high bar in terms of knowledge, in terms of funding, in terms of kind of professional effectiveness. And what we want to use our process to is really to collect information and an evidence base that the law perhaps could be changed so that people can, in local communities, plant a flag about where and what they value, and give an element of protection in the same way as we've got in England. Likewise in Wales, there have been quite a lot of discussion about adopting the asset of community value process. Currently, that's not the case. They have got community asset transfer, as we do in England, and it's worth just touching momentarily on community asset transfer. As Alex said, that can be something that councils go down, particularly effective where you've got an asset which is expensive to regenerate and the like, and so on. And I think that an independent organisation would be better placed to fundraise and make use of that building as part of a wider regeneration initiative. And there's some wonderful examples of that. But That's community asset transfer, not ACV. The overview then, you, members, identify potential assets in your local community. You create a shortlist, you send us a shortlist, we'll create a petition form, we'll give you that petition form. You've got a local campaign, again, through WhatsApp groups, digital, text, or, you know, we've all kind of connected more than we've ever been. There may be, I anticipate a delay during lockdown, and certainly my own council is saying, look, just don't contact us at the moment. We've got far too much on. Unless it's a matter of life and death, just wait. And that's kind of fair enough. So what we anticipate is kind of a bit of delay in terms of actually submitting some applications. And certainly for Then England, number 6, we can send the petition and the information which you'll need to produce to the council for the listing process. And in Scotland and Wales, we will send that information to Assembly members in Wales and to MSPs in Scotland to use as an evidence base for provoking some debate. We now kind of move on to the questions and discussions, and because I've been screen sharing, I've not been able to see some of the chat, but I know there's plenty of questions. I'm going to start off with one from submitted earlier. Thank you very much, Chris Penberthy, by email, which gives me a chance to look at the Zoom chat and see. So Chris, you are live.
Great, thanks. And I think the principle of assets of community value is a really positive one. And while it was great to see it in the Localism Act, in practice, what we found here is that you get an asset listed, and when it comes to trying to be able to buy it, coming up with a price that is realistic and acceptable to the seller has proven difficult. So the ones that have come on the market have ended up not being purchased by community groups. They've gone on and ended up being redeveloped. And because that's been our entire experience, it's a big disincentive. But we've also got businesses subverting the process. If at the point the asset is listed, there is an offer on the table, that offer takes precedence. So we've got a big cinema complex in the middle of town with an Art Deco frontage. Before it was known that it was likely to go on the market, several years ago, the owner, with an eye to this, accepted a provisional offer subject to planning from a company that they've still got an interest in, but the company's only interest is in developing the site. So whilst the owner isn't at the moment soft marketing the cinema, the subsidiary that has, or the other company that has the ownership option, is soft marketing it. So that way they will get around the ability for the local community to try and raise what we understand is going to be £3.5 million in 6 months to protect what was a venue where the Beatles played and all sorts of other things here in Plymouth. And, you know, a large town centre potential community performance and arts venue would be fantastic. But I think we need to look at how we potentially make it harder for property developers to manipulate the way that the process goes, and also the way that we ensure that owners do accept realistic offers, and there could be a role for an independent valuation or something to assist in that. It's just awful that when community groups go through the process of listing, 5 years later, they're relisting, and what they're seeing is other people having lost the option, so lose their incentive. So I think, as well as a campaign to save assets, we need to be looking at how we seek to change the legislation here in England as well, because my guess is there's lots more things on the registers than are actually ending up in community ownership.
Thanks, Chris. I've got a very similar question from Dan Gregory. Are you all right asking that question, Dan? Do you want to wave to me if you're happy? Right, fire away, Dan. Just as a introduction, this meeting is full of people who know far more about this than certainly I do. And here's another person.
It's absolutely not true. Thank you, James, and thanks, James and Alex, for hosting this. It's great to be part of it and to see so many people. No, I just wondered whether, because there's a sort of sense that with the lockdown, things are moving slowly in terms of people being able to get together and organise, whether this kind of window which the listing creates, the sort of time period that allows people to get together, will that sort of not be as useful because we'll run out of time in a lot of cases? So even if we listed everything in the country now, by the time sort of people are back out on the streets, back at work, back at school, some of this, it might be too late. So I wonder whether sort of from a legislative perspective, whether Alex and co, whether a bunch of us and a range of sort of interests from locality to Co-op Party and Co-ops UK and Social Enterprise UK and others could be thinking about suggesting changes to the law to extend that period. I mean, obviously that's fraught with, massively unlikely outcome, but just concerned that, people will do a lot to list the assets and then just run out of time.
I'm going to mute you, Dan, and then go to Alex, if that's okay. And I can pick up anything that you missed out of those two, and then we'll get another round of questions in.
I think, Dan, you've got a good point. I mean, what I was saying before was we should use this period to do some mapping and to look at what we'd like to list, and actually the crisis exposing places that we'd like to list that we didn't think of before. But then you're right, if we're in a long lockdown and we're beginning to hear that the unlocking is going to happen sectorally. So some of the places we're talking about might be unlocked last. So if it's a pub, for instance, that might be the last thing to open, which puts it even more at risk. So there probably is certainly some questions to ask around whether the periods can be extended or whether the process can start post lockdown to give people longer. So I certainly think that there are probably other areas of law where there should be a pause during lockdown. Now, what the government will say, because I'm trying to deal with this in other areas, is they will try, because it really, you could do this through statutory instrument, I think, but they are very keen on saying, no, you can't, this needs to be primary legislation, because that means that you can't do it. Because we can't do primary legislation for all those things. We haven't got the bandwidth or the ability at the moment because of the way Parliament is. So there probably is a campaign there, a lobbying campaign, and to get an SI through is still possible if it's uncontested, which it would be on our side, and we're the ones that contest things. So I think that definitely, if maybe we could do some work on lobbying government, drafting an SI and trying to get them to implement it, that would be a good idea.
Thank you, Alex. Just my reflections of that would be, I think the moratorium question is a really good one. I don't think anyone's ever considered it in terms of, this is a unique situation. And specifically addressing Chris's point about there are flaws in the legislation, there's no doubt about it. And one of the failures of the government is that it's not reviewed the legislation adequate at all, which is, it's pretty much meant to do for after 2 years for every bit of legislation. And although the CLG select committee's had a look at it, they've not done that. Part of the game is to kind of get an evidence base of what's going on and what's not going on, to use that to say, look, it's overdue now. Now, I believe I've got a bit of a problem with the chat function, but I believe Frank has got a question. So I'm going to unmute you now, Frank.
Yeah, it was interesting to get Frank Ellis, I live in Manchester. It's interesting to get the view that the Church of England is exempt, because a lot of church halls locally are under threat, both Church of England, Methodist and other. And they are used for a lot of community facilities. And I'm told the cuts have made them even harder. So I think that's an area where you could see a sudden large vanishing of community assets if you're not careful.
Okay, I'm going to take in Andrew Manning, if that's all right. Andrew, bear me a second while I mute you. And oh, sorry, there. Go ahead, Andrew.
Hello there. Thanks for the invite. My basic question was going back to the issue of the buildings of special importance to community assets. Is there going to be a contradiction between sometimes a building that's regarded as a community asset and that a building that's historically listed? Because there could be issues of planning permission, etc., and so forth. Are we encountering many of these problems, or is there a halfway house, pardon the pun, of a compromise on this issue?
Okay, and one more from Evelyn. Bear with me a second, Evelyn, while I find you on my screen. If you could.
Yeah, I've just unmuted myself.
Oh, great. Thank you, Evelyn. Fire away.
Okay, yeah, it's Evelyn. Yeah, so I'm an archaeologist by profession, and I'm the director of a heritage cooperative in Oxfordshire. And we set this cooperative up when I was a Labour and Cooperative Parish Councillor in 2011 to 2015, when this legislation came in. So, and the new NPPF and so on. And so we did a listing immediately of a local building. It's a 17th century one-room schoolhouse. So the building itself is what we were interested in, but recently it's been used as a little museum. So we listed that. We were kind of hoping that this would be of use to heritage, you know, in the meaning of archaeology in the historic environment, but it obviously isn't. And I know what you've been saying here is more that it's to do with leisure and tourism and not heritage. But just as a comment on your campaign, we were able to do the listing because we didn't need to do a petition or anything like this, because we're an established registered local heritage cooperative. And it's called Uffington Heritage Watch, so it's based in a place with a huge amount of archaeology and historic environment and conservation areas and listed buildings and White Horse Hill and lots of scheduled ancient monuments and all sorts that really needs to be protected, and also an area that's of great interest to developers living in rural Oxfordshire, and hundreds of houses have been built around here, and that was our concern about protecting the historic environment. But this legislation, this assets of community value, didn't really do anything to help. But we can do these without a petition. Uffington Heritage Watch can help you and do this. So I mean, we'd be very happy to work with the Co-op Party. I've been an active Co-op Party member for 8 years now, since 2012, and stood as a candidate for district and county council every time. So we'd be happy to help you do these listings in the area where we operate, which is all of Oxfordshire, Gloucestershire and Wiltshire. So our local area is the old Oxford, Swinton and Gloucester Co-op area that's now mid-counties. And we had support from mid-counties in setting up. But so there was that. I mean, I'd be really happy to be in contact with you separately about this as an alternative to the petition thing, at least in our local area, Oxfordshire, Gloucestershire and Wiltshire, about doing listings, because we've successfully done that. It was no problem for us to do that. But the other thing I'd like to say is that, you know, we in the heritage sector, the professional heritage sector, the use of the word asset really isn't appropriate. Because it does have to do with commerce and leisure and tourism and so on, and that's fine if that's what you're talking about, pubs and nightclubs and things like this. But there shouldn't be a commercialization of archaeology and the historic environment. Obviously, this is the patrimony of the cultural patrimony of the people. So
I'm going to stop you there if that's all right, because I know Alex has got to go shortly.
My general point was about including heritage in this portfolio of tourism and heritage in that order. And would the Co-op Party and the Labour Party, it's the Labour Party really, maybe be willing to think outside the box, the Tory agenda box, and maybe put heritage in the environment portfolio, which is where current professional understanding puts it, and where the European Landscape Convention and so on puts it. So there's not this idea of assets and commercialization of heritage, seeing as this all isn't really appropriate for the historic environment and heritage anyway.
Okay, one for your new portfolio there, Alex, I think.
Oh, there we go. So basically, I don't think your question had a huge amount to do with asset community value, but I was given the portfolio because it mirrors what the government's doing, and then generally we can't, although we do have a few, we can't just go creating all our own things as a shadow government, and ignoring what the government's doing. We do have to shadow what the government's doing. But if you look at my background isn't about leisure or tourism. I've literally done nothing about leisure tourism. My whole background really in Parliament and before, and when I was on the EC Council, I was a lead on environment and climate change. It is on environment and climate change. So when I took the brief, it was around trying to green tourism and work with the heritage sector around heritage assets, looking at both built environment and the environmental, issues around heritage sites. So that's my personal view, and that is the way that I'll try and drive policy. So it's not about, the Labour Party isn't going to say, well, the government wants to commercialise the heritage sector. It's about visitor numbers to Chatsworth. The Labour Party is going to have its own view, and that's why we're the opposition. Yeah, because we're not here to go along with the government. So you don't worry about that. But we're not going to create a shadow minister for heritage in DEFRA. That's not going to happen, because we are mirroring as far as possible what the government's doing, because otherwise it would be hugely chaotic actually to form a credible opposition. But you can rest assured that my priorities around this brief are around the environment. I'll just also take Andrew's point around listing listed buildings and asset community value. The two things don't really interact with each other. So if you were successful with a listing of a grade, say a grade 2 listed building, and you got it listed, and then you had the moratorium, you bought the building, it wouldn't be delisted. The listing stays, and whatever the regulations were around the listing, they would remain. So actually, if you're a community organisation wanting to take on a listed building through this, you have to be very mindful that there are obviously additional costs, additional issues that you're going to have to be mindful for. So it's not one or the other. The law applies equally for both. And actually, what we've seen is both in the private sector, people take on listed buildings and then don't have the wherewithal to maintain them. So I think it's important to take that into account if you're looking at a listed building.
Alex, I've got nothing further to add to the questions. Do you want to take one more round of questions, or do you need to go?
Take a quick one.
Okay, I'm going to give you David Breed, and then we'll come after David Breed. And maybe if there's a question from that, I might be able to help. And David, fire away.
What I was talking about really was really getting together some of the information that's required for sort of this, because I'm involved with a cooperatively owned pub in a small village, and basically the problem with that is obviously that what they wanted to do was expand the arrangements for the pub into become a community shop, because the shop didn't exist there anymore. So I think what we need to get is really sort of a wide range of information, so that's all we can help to pick things up, and then taking it further, how to get cash resources, how to fundraise, and all the other bits and pieces, so that we can move this smoothly from sort of a good idea, sort of decided sort of on a meeting like this, into something which actually becomes reality. I think the Co-op Party and the Co-op movement can sort of help themselves and help each other actually moving this forward in this way. So I'd like Alex to comment on that.
Do you want me to come in now?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So I think that actually the two organisations that really are experts in this work you need to speak to are Locality and Plunkett Foundation. Plunkett if you're in a rural area, a market town. If the organisation that you're talking about isn't a member locality, I would strongly suggest they join. And locality can give one-to-one support. Obviously, the COP party is a political party involved in lobbying and legislation and campaigning, but I wouldn't suggest that we as a party start giving advice and support on individual listings, individual campaigns, although the COP party should support campaigns, in terms of marketing, but not giving the technical advice. Both locality and Plunkett are set up to do that. There is an element of supporting COPS UK as well, but even they, if you ring COPS UK, because I've been through this, they would suggest you speak to those organisations because they're the ones with the most expertise, and they work very closely with the co-op movement. It is part of the broader, social enterprise and co-op sort of movement organisation.
Okay, one more question perhaps from Jeff Walker. I can't see you, Jeff. Is it possible you could unmute yourself?
Okay, I'm unmuted now. All right.
Yeah, fire away.
Yeah, Jeff Walker, Sunderland City Council and Sunderland Football Club supporter. Very interested in this idea of football clubs becoming community assets, Alex. But I would think that they're not just an asset as a football club, but another feature, a number of features that the football club has, like, for instance, the Academy of Light football, the football academy itself, the Beacon of Light, which is the training centre next to the ground, which is used for training football apprentices, and the two pubs that surround the ground, the Colliery Tavern and the Wheatsheaf pub, which are in difficulties during the week, but obviously thrive on match days. Could we lump them all together as a community asset?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I just looked at the list of community assets in Sunderland, and actually it is really very few. There's only 7, and one of them's the Co-op Centre, I know very well, which is a load of old shipping containers. I imagine they've got expertise in this area because I know they're on the COP Enterprise Hub. That's probably why they listed themselves as Sustainable Enterprise Strategy. I certainly would speak Sustainable Enterprise Strategies if I were you in Sunderland for this. But I think you're right, and that various different assets. The thing you might struggle with, because the reason why stadiums aren't very hard to list is because the public use them, because obviously people go and spectate matches. Now, if it's a training ground and only professional footballers utilise them, then it will be harder to list them. If a youth team or the women's team or some other team use it as their main ground and people come to watch the games, well, even particularly if they don't pay money, it doesn't matter. As long as there are spectators and the community's using it, then that would mean that you're probably more likely to get it listed. But if it is solely a training ground and the club professionals the only ones that use it, then you might have some difficulty in getting it listed.
Okay.
Right, I think I'm going to wind up. Actually, we've had 50 minutes of current participant excluding brilliant contributions. Modesty forbids, obviously. So I'd like to thank Alex, hugely for doing this. Could everyone give a little kind of virtual clap? Can we do that? Yep. Thank everyone else for joining us. We will be sending around information about the resources available, but if you go to Co-op Party, I think it's / Lily Resource, which is LILI Resource. You can see a little bit more, but additionally, kind of drop me an email or give me a call. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere in the like many of you in the short term. So thank you hugely for a Wednesday catch up. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks everybody. Bye bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.